Hi there, welcome to yet another episode of Sanity Reviews, where I go out of my way to take a look at various games or game updates, or maybe even some mods here at some point, and basically kind of go over them, my own experiences with them, and rate them on my totally objective and definitely not stolen from Destin Goblin Sanity Seal of Approval. Today we're going to be reviewing Atlyss, a very interesting game, I should probably add, that honestly is something that probably warrants an explanation in and of itself, especially considering the fact that it's one of them furry games once again. But listen, before you click off, this one is actually surprisingly good, okay? Just hear me out on this one. So Atlyss. It's an early access game that currently exists on Steam for a grand total of only $10, and hilariously enough on Steam, before I even purchased it, Steam apparently compared it to Elden Ring for some reason. Now, this game, developed and published by Kisssoft, is a very interesting little, RPG game. Yes, it is in fact one of those RPG-type games, and honestly, it kind of is very good at kind of giving that overall vibe of like one of those old school kinds of RPG games. Let's first start off with the actual, just overall, like, soundtrack of the game. You see, it actually has a surprisingly good soundtrack. For the few areas that exist within the game as of right now, the soundtrack for each area is delightfully unique and very well made. Probably just a little bit more variation in the instruments here and there, but that's really about it that I can really give it in terms of the soundtrack. But of course it is probably, once again, like I mentioned before, trying to go for that old school style, because if you take a look at the overall graphics of the game, it definitely is reminiscent of a lot of those like old school RuneScapes kinds of games, if you will. And the gameplay itself kind of reminds me of like Diablo 3, if you will. The only reason why I'm choosing Diablo 3 is because it's my only experience with the Diablo series, and I used to play that game at least a decent amount on my PlayStation 3 before it fucked off, so, you know, there's at least that going for it. Now, to get into some of the other aspects of the game, the character creation screen is probably one of the more interesting parts, and it's probably the one part that a lot of people tend to talk about whenever it comes to this game, which I can kind of see why. After all, you don't really get animations like these in a lot of your character creation, but let's be honest here, this is a game that very clearly isn't trying to take itself that seriously, because I think it kind of knows the kind of game that it's supposed to be. And honestly, I can kind of appreciate that. I can appreciate games that understand what it is that they're kind of going for, and are willing to take themselves with just the right amount of ridiculousness that is reasonable for a game like this. Like, honestly, I wouldn't have expected something like this. So, in the character creation, you can choose between one of 5 different races. There's the Imp, the Poon, which is a, for some reason, extremely funny name to me, the Kobold, or as I'll just call it the Kobold because that's what I'm more used to, the Birdle, which is very self-explanatory, and the Chang, which is a mouse. Now, surprisingly enough, despite the fact that the mouse itself looks absolutely fucking tiny, oddly enough, the shortest race is actually the Imp, so you'd be dead wrong. Now, of course, the only difference between each of these races, other than the different customization options, and of course their overall appearance, is of course the starting spells that you basically get with each one. Obviously, if you want to kind of go for, you know, more creativity and just kind of like the generic furry look, probably just go for like the Poon or something like that. And I guess, you know, if you want something that at least vaguely resembles a human, the closest thing is the Imp, so there you go. But of course you have to deal with being absurdly short. For some reason, that one's the shortest race, and I think that that is extremely funny to me. Now, of course, once you actually finally get into the game itself, you basically are greeted to the main hub world. Now, this hub world has a few different NPCs that you can speak to. There's an enchanter NPC, there's obviously a shop NPC, then there's this thing that you can use to kind of like transfer, you know, items between saves with, I think, which I which is actually pretty cool, I will say. Then, of course, there's this individual right here that goes by the name of Angela, who you're going to be speaking with quite a bit throughout Atlyss's current state of the game in order to get a lot of your quests. Now, of course, a few other NPCs have some quests. I haven't really talked to any of them for those quests yet. In fact, there's quite a few different things within this game that I really have yet to experience, but considering the fact that I've already put in at least, like, I don't know, already about like almost 5 hours into the game, I think I can definitely say that it's definitely worth your time. Now, of course, where things start to get really interesting whenever it comes to the game is, of course, around level 10, which is where you can actually start to go into specific classes that currently exist in the game. Now, I think there's only like 3 main classes as of right now. There's the Warrior, there's the Mystic, and then there's I think it's the Rogue? And of course, I think you can take a wild guess as to what each one, is proficient in. The Warriors are obviously mainly for the hand-to-hand combat, if you will. The Rogue, funnily enough, has absolutely nothing to do with knives or anything along those lines, is more proficient with the bows in the game. And then, of course, the Mystic is obviously your standard-issue mage class, if you will. Obviously, I decided to choose the Warrior. I'll probably try out some of the other classes whenever I get the time, because those honestly seem pretty interesting, and they probably have their own little different things that make them unique. But as of right now, I can safely say that the Warrior is extremely fun to fuck around with. Then, of course, there's this other little area that you can go to, which is kind of like the open world arena, if you will, where you can just kind of go around and fight different enemies that exist right there. There's like 3 different parts to it that are very interesting, and you unlock those as you level up throughout the game, which is also pretty cool. There's also these little dungeons that you can kind of go into. There's currently 3 of them to my knowledge, and I've only really experienced 2 of them, but one thing I will in fact say is that each of the dungeons seem to be randomly generated, which I kind of like. It allows a little bit more variety instead of just kind of going through like the same exact dungeon layout over and over again. It at least allows you to experience different things. Now, in terms of weapons that exist in the game, there's at least a few different distinct types that I can think of off the top of my head that currently exist in the game. There's the one-handed weapons, there's the two-handed weapons, then there are the dual-wielded blades. I'm not exactly sure what exactly they call them. They aren't exactly katars, but they're... Now, in terms of the overall art style of the game, it's actually very interesting. Like, the textures of the game are actually pretty nice, albeit a little bit muddied here and there, but that's really my only complaint whenever it comes to some of the, at least, environment textures. In terms of the animation quality in the game, it is absolutely fantastic, and probably one of the main parts of the game that it really shines out. That, and of course, the overall gameplay loop that exists within the game. Obviously, if you're not into, like, the Diablo-esque kind of, like, RPG, gameplay loop, then this game is probably not going to be for you, but I think one of the main standout moments of this game is, of course, just how expressive everything is. The animations for even just like the standard issue enemies and the bosses are extremely expressive, really bouncy, and overall just really fun to look at. I'm just going to put it this way. And probably the last thing that I feel like I should really bring in is that this game comes with integrated jiggle physics. And unlike games that also come with integrated jiggle physics, you can actually turn them off. Oh my god, okay? I'm just glad that you can actually do this with this game. Jesus Christ, okay? I'm actually just glad that there's a game that allows you to do this. Leave it to an indie furry game for it to actually allow you to turn off the gooner material, so that way you don't have to stare at bouncing tits all the time if you don't want to be staring at that the entire time while trying to beat up your local demon. So, at least I can definitely give it that. And of course, there's also a few little bits of attention to detail, like for example, like, certain pieces of armor will actually, like, compress certain aspects of the body a little bit, which I think is really neat, and really shows that there's a lot of care being put into this game in terms of just how it wants to present itself. Overall, I can definitely say that Atlyss is definitely one of those games that honestly really took me by surprise, okay? Especially whenever it comes to furry games. Listen, as a furry myself, okay, as someone who is within that godforsaken community myself, I can definitely say that this is a game that really took me by surprise. Whether or not the developers themselves are furries, I can definitely say that they definitely know the kinds of audience that they are trying to cater to with this game, and I can definitely really appreciate credit where credit is due. So overall, in terms of everything when it comes to Atlyss, I think I can definitely safely give it 4.5 out of 5. 5 stars on the seal of approval. The main pros whenever it comes to this game is, of course, you know, the overall design of the game. It definitely harkens back to those old school classic, like, you know, multiplayer RPG games of the past. The animations are extremely bouncy. The anime variety is surprisingly good, even though it is, in fact, in, like, a very early, like, you know, early access point in the game. And, of course, the overall gameplay loop is actually surprisingly solid, especially for the kind of game that it is. The only cons are, of course, like, some of the, you know, textures and whatnot kind of, you know, looking a little bit wonky in certain areas of the game, and, of course, sometimes they look a little bit muddied, but who knows, maybe they'll kind of improve on that as the game kind of continues into development. But I think beyond there, there's really not much else I can talk about. Really, my only other complaint with this game is that there's just not a whole lot of anything much else to do. Like I said, there's like the 3 different areas that exist within the game, there's a couple of bosses that you can fight, and there's 3 different types of dungeons that you can go into. But outside of that, there's really not much else, and once you've already done that, you might as well just kind of start up like a new save file or something along those lines to kind of experience some of the other classes. And honestly, if the only complaint with the game is that there's not enough to do in the current state that it is right now, you know that you're currently doing something well. Anyway, standard outro. Leave a like, subscribe, go ahead and comment on what you thought about the video, go ahead and follow me on Blue Sky, join the Discord server, special thanks to my channel members, and yeah, anyways guys, this has been Sanity. I'll see you guys in the next video.